The dust cloud rose like a signal fire against the Colorado sky, as Eleanor Nash watched the stranger ride up her long dirt road toward the ranch house, and something in her chest tightened with a feeling she could not name. She stood on the porch of her weathered home in Fort Garland, one hand shading her eyes from the late afternoon sun of July 1878, the other gripping the wooden railing as if it might anchor her to something solid. 3 years had passed since Thomas died, 3 years of struggling to keep this ranch alive, 3 years of neighbors whispering that a woman could not run a spread this size alone, 3 years of proving them wrong until her body ached and her hands bled and she knew she could not do it anymore. The rider came closer, and Eleanor could make out details now. Young, she thought, probably early 20s, sitting tall in the saddle on a bay mare that looked road-weary but well cared for. He wore a dusty brown hat, faded denim pants, and a shirt that had once been blue but had been bleached by sun and wash water to something closer to gray. A bedroll was tied behind his saddle, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more nights under stars than under roofs. Eleanor descended the porch steps as he reined in his horse near the hitching post. Up close, she could see he was older than she had first thought, perhaps 24 or 25, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. Dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and when he removed it to greet her, she noticed the white line across his forehead where the sun had not reached. "Madam," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected, roughened by trail dust. "Name's Matthew Porter. Saw your notice in town about needing a hired hand." Eleanor had posted that notice 2 weeks ago at the general store, half hoping and half dreading someone would answer. She needed help desperately. The cattle needed moving to higher pasture, the fences were falling apart faster than she could repair them, and the hay needed cutting before the weather turned. But hiring someone meant trusting someone, meant letting another person into the world she had built around herself like a fortress. "You have experience with cattle?" she asked, keeping her voice level and businesslike. "Yes, madam. Worked cattle drives up from Texas twice, spent the last year working a ranch outside Denver. Boss there sold out, so I am looking for steady work." He gestured toward the pastures beyond the house, where her small herd grazed. "You running about 300 head. 280, she corrected. "Used to be 500, but I have been selling off what I cannot manage alone." Something flickered in his eyes, sympathy perhaps, and Eleanor felt her spine stiffen. She did not want pity. She had endured enough of that to last a lifetime. "I can manage them," Matthew said simply. "Good with horses too if you need breaking or training done. I am handy with repairs, can shoe a horse, mend a fence, fix most anything that breaks. Room and board plus $30 a month," Eleanor said. The words came out more sharply than she intended. "You will sleep in the bunkhouse. Meals are provided. I expect a full day's work for a full day's pay." Matthew nodded slowly, and she noticed he was studying her just as carefully as she was studying him. What did he see? A woman of 29 who looked older, she supposed, worn down by work and grief and Colorado wind. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dress was practical calico, mended in places and faded from countless washings. She knew her hands were rough, her face sun-weathered, her figure thin from too many meals skipped when there was work to be done instead. "Sounds fair," Matthew said. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning, sunrise. You can stable your horse in the barn and put your gear in the bunkhouse tonight. There is stew on the stove if you are hungry." She turned away before he could respond, heading back toward the house with measured steps, fighting the urge to look back. Only when she was inside with the door closed did she lean against it and press a hand to her racing heart. What was she doing, letting a stranger onto her property? But what choice did she have? The ranch was dying, and she was dying with it, ground down by work that would break any single person. Through the kitchen window, she watched Matthew lead his horse toward the barn. He moved with an easy grace, speaking softly to the mare, running a hand along her neck. Eleanor had always thought you could tell a man's character by how he treated his animals. Thomas had been gentle with horses, patient and kind, and she felt an unexpected pang at the memory. That night, Eleanor lay awake in the bed she had shared with her husband, staring at the ceiling beams Thomas had cut and placed himself when they built this house 10 years ago. She had been 19 then, newly married, full of dreams about the life they would build together. Thomas had been 35, an established rancher who had swept her off her feet with his quiet strength and steady devotion. They had planned for children, for a dynasty, for growing old together watching their grandchildren play in these fields. Then came the winter of '75, one of the worst Colorado had ever seen. Thomas had gone out during a blizzard to check on the cattle, and his horse had thrown him. They found him 3 days later, frozen in a snowdrift less than a mile from home. Eleanor had been 26 years old and suddenly alone with a ranch to run and debts to pay, and no idea how she would survive. But she had survived. She had learned to ride and rope and brand. She had learned to shoot to protect against rustlers and predators. She had learned to calculate feed costs and market prices. She had learned to be hard when the world demanded hardness. So why did the arrival of one young cowboy make her feel so unsettled? Morning came cold and clear, as July mornings in the Colorado high country often did. Eleanor was up before dawn, as always, starting the stove and putting coffee on to boil. She made biscuits and gravy, fried salt pork, scrambled eggs from the chickens she kept near the house. It was more than she usually made for herself, but if Matthew was going to work for her, he needed feeding properly. He knocked on the kitchen door just as the sun was breaking over the mountains to the east, hat in hand, looking freshly washed despite the limitations of the bunkhouse pump. "Morning, madam," he said. "Eleanor," she corrected, surprising herself. "You can call me Eleanor. Madam makes me feel like somebody's grandmother." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his face from serious to something warmer. "Eleanor, then." "And I am Matthew, or Matt if you prefer." She gestured him inside, and he sat at the table while she piled food onto a plate for him. He ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had been truly hungry and did not take meals for granted. Eleanor poured coffee for both of them and sat down across from him with her own smaller portion. "The fences on the north pasture need the most work," she said, launching into business. "I have been patching them, but they need proper rebuilding. After that, the cattle need moving up to summer range in about 2 weeks. The hay needs cutting, but I hired the Johnson boys to help with that. The barn roof leaks in 3 places. The windmill pump needs a new gasket, and one of the stock tanks has a crack that needs mending." Matthew listened, nodding, not looking overwhelmed by the recitation of endless chores. "We will start with the fences," he said. "Get those secure, then I can assess the rest. You have materials, wire and posts in the barn, tools too. Then I will get started after breakfast." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Eleanor, I know this is not easy having a stranger here. I want you to know I am grateful for the work and I will earn my keep. You will not regret hiring me." Something in his directness made her throat tight. She nodded curtly and stood to clear the dishes, turning away so he would not see whatever emotion might be showing on her face. The days fell into a rhythm. Matthew worked from sunrise to sunset, and Eleanor found herself watching him more than she wanted to admit. He was skilled, she noted with relief. The fences he rebuilt were straight and strong. He handled the cattle with confidence, and the horses responded to him with trust. He did not complain about the work or the isolation, did not ask for time off to go drinking in town like some hired hands she had employed before Thomas died. He was also quiet, which she appreciated. Some men felt the need to fill every silence with words, but Matthew seemed comfortable with quiet. They would work side by side mending tack or sorting through winter supplies, and sometimes an hour would pass with nothing said except what the work required. But sometimes he would tell her things. Small things, offered casually as they worked. He had grown up in Missouri, he said, on a small farm that could not support all 7 children in his family. He had headed west at 16, riding with a trail boss who needed hands and did not ask too many questions. He had seen Texas and Kansas and Wyoming, had slept under more stars than he could count, had learned to read the weather and the land and the subtle communications of cattle. "You ever think about settling somewhere?" Eleanor asked him one afternoon as they replaced boards on the corral fence. "Buying your own place," Matthew hammered in a nail before answering. "Sometimes, but land costs money, and I have been sending most of what I earn back to my family. My youngest sister is about ready for school, and I want to make sure she gets proper education, not just farming." Eleanor felt something soften in her chest at that. A man who sacrificed his own dreams for his sister's education was a man of character. "That is generous of you," she said quietly. He shrugged. "Family takes care of family. That is how it is supposed to work." The words hung in the air between them, and Eleanor thought about her own family. Her parents had died of fever when she was 17. Her only brother had moved to California before the war, and she had not heard from him in years. Thomas had been an only child whose parents were long dead. She was alone in the world except for this ranch, this land, this legacy of a marriage that had ended too soon. August arrived with hot days and cool nights. The cattle were moved to higher pasture without incident, and Matthew proved his skill with a rope and a cutting horse. Eleanor rode with him, feeling more alive in the saddle than she had in months. Up in the high meadows, with the mountains rising around them and the sky impossibly blue overhead, she could almost forget about the loneliness that waited back at the house. They stopped to rest the horses near a creek, and Matthew pulled jerky and biscuits from his saddlebag, offering half to Eleanor. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the water and the wind in the pines. "This is beautiful country," Matthew said, gazing at the peaks. "You are lucky to have this. Thomas and I chose this spot together," Eleanor heard herself say. "We rode all over this valley looking for the right place to build. He said he wanted land where the mountains would watch over us." It was the first time she had mentioned Thomas to Matthew, and she was not sure why she did it now. Maybe it was the altitude making her light-headed, or maybe it was the way Matthew looked at the landscape with such genuine appreciation. "He had good taste," Matthew said simply, without the uncomfortable sympathy people usually offered when she mentioned her late husband. "Both in land and in wives, I expect." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush and busied herself rewrapping the leftover food. "We should head back. There is still daylight enough to get some work done." But as they rode down from the high country, she found herself thinking about Matthew's words. What would Thomas think of this young cowboy she had hired? Would he approve? Would he understand the strange flutter in her chest when Matthew smiled? The way her eyes sought him out across the yard, the hollow feeling when evening came, and he retreated to the bunkhouse, while she entered the empty house alone. She pushed the thoughts away. They were dangerous thoughts, inappropriate thoughts. Matthew worked for her. He was younger than her by several years, and more than that, she was still Thomas's widow, still wearing the identity of grief like a garment she could not remove. September brought the first hints of autumn, golden aspens in the high country and crisp mornings that required a jacket. The hay was cut and stored, the cattle were fattening on good grass, and the ranch was in better shape than it had been in 3 years. Eleanor found herself relaxing in ways she had not thought possible, her shoulders loosening from their perpetual hunch of tension, her sleep coming easier. She also found herself paying more attention to her appearance, which made her feel foolish. She started wearing her better dresses instead of just the faded work clothes. She took more care with her hair, letting it down in the evenings so the waves showed. She caught herself humming while she cooked, something she had not done since before Thomas died. Matthew noticed, she thought, though he was too polite to say anything. But sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and wondering that made her pulse quicken. One evening in mid-September, Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a commotion from the barn. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from above the door and ran outside, heart pounding. In the fading light, she could see Matthew in the corral with one of the horses, a young gelding she had been meaning to sell because he was too wild to be useful. The horse was rearing and plunging, and Matthew was speaking to him in that low, calm voice she had heard him use before. He was not trying to break the horse through force, she realized, but through patience. He stood in the center of the corral, turning slowly as the horse circled him, maintaining eye contact, projecting calm confidence. Eleanor lowered the rifle and leaned against the fence, watching. It took almost an hour, but gradually the horse's circles grew smaller, his movements less frantic. Finally, he stopped, blowing hard, regarding Matthew with wary eyes. Matthew took one step forward. The horse held his ground. Another step. The horse's ears flicked forward, curiosity replacing fear. When Matthew finally reached out and placed a hand on the horse's neck, Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. There was something so gentle about the gesture, so full of patient understanding. The horse stood quivering under Matthew's hand, and Matthew just waited, letting the animal learn that touch did not mean harm. "That was beautiful," Eleanor said softly when Matthew finally left the corral, and she meant it. Matthew looked surprised to see her there. "He is not mean, just scared. Someone must have treated him rough. He just needs to learn he can trust again." The words seemed to echo in Eleanor's chest. Trust again. Was that what she needed to learn too? "Stay for supper?" she asked impulsively. "I made too much, and it seems silly for you to eat alone in the bunkhouse." Something crossed Matthew's face, hesitation perhaps, or maybe the same uncertainty she felt. But he nodded. "I would like that." They ate at the kitchen table, and for the first time their conversation moved beyond work. Matthew asked about Fort Garland, about the town's history, about the people Eleanor knew. She found herself telling him about the early days of the ranch, about Thomas's dreams and her own, about the challenges of those first winters and the satisfaction of seeing the herd grow. "You must have loved him very much," Matthew said quietly. Eleanor was silent for a moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "I did," she said finally. "But it was a different kind of love than I expected. Thomas was a good man, a kind man. He took care of me. But he was so much older, and sometimes I felt more like a daughter than a wife." "Does that sound terrible?" "It sounds honest," Matthew said. She looked up at him, struck by the understanding in his eyes. "I have never said that to anyone before." Sometimes it is easier to say hard things to someone who did not know the before. They talked until the candles burned low, and when Matthew finally stood to leave, Eleanor felt the weight of loneliness settle back over her shoulders. She did not want him to go. She wanted him to stay, to keep talking, to fill the house with his quiet presence. But she could not say that, so she just bid him good night and watched through the window as he crossed the yard to the bunkhouse. That night marked a change. Matthew started joining her for supper regularly, and their conversations deepened. He told her about his dreams beyond just supporting his family. He wanted land of his own someday, he said, a small spread where he could raise horses. He had a gift with them. Anyone could see that, and Eleanor encouraged the dream. You could find land around here, she suggested. There are parcels available if you save enough. Maybe, Matthew said, but his eyes were on her face, not on some distant imagined future. I like it here. The October air turned sharp, and Eleanor knew they needed to move the cattle down from the high pastures before the first big snow. It was a 2-day job, requiring camping overnight in the mountains, and Eleanor hesitated before telling Matthew her plan. I will ride with you, she said. 2 people can handle it, but 1 would be foolish. If Matthew was concerned about the propriety of spending a night in the mountains alone with his employer, he did not show it. We will leave at dawn tomorrow, he agreed. I will pack the camping gear. They rode out as the sun was breaking over the peaks, leading 2 pack horses loaded with supplies. The cattle had scattered across several meadows over the summer, and it took most of the day to round them up. Eleanor worked alongside Matthew, and she noticed how well they moved together, almost instinctively understanding what the other would do. When she pushed the herd left, he was already in position to turn them. When he needed someone to cut out a stubborn steer, she was there. By the time they had the herd gathered and moving, the sun was sinking toward the horizon. They camped in a sheltered valley with good grass for the cattle and the horses. Matthew built a fire while Eleanor unpacked their food supplies. They ate beans and bacon and drank coffee that tasted better than it had any right to, the way coffee always did when made over a campfire under stars. My father used to say coffee tastes better when you have earned it, Matthew said, echoing her thoughts. Eleanor smiled. He sounds like a wise man. He I hope he is still anyway. Been almost a year since I had a letter from home. You miss them. Every day, but this is the life I chose, and I cannot say I regret it, especially not lately. He looked at her as he said it, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. The firelight played across his features, casting half his face in shadow, and she was suddenly very aware that they were alone together in the vastness of the mountains, that no rules or propriety existed out here beyond what they chose. Eleanor, Matthew said softly, and there was a question in his voice in the way he said her name. Yes, her own voice came out barely above a whisper. These months working here, getting to know you, I have come to care for you, more than I should probably. More than is proper for a hired hand, but I cannot help it. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and the most beautiful, though I do not think you realize it. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Matthew, I am older than you. I am your employer. I am a widow. People would talk. I do not care about any of that, do you? He leaned forward, his eyes intent on her face. Do you care what people say, or do you care about what you feel? I do not know what I feel, Eleanor said, but it was a lie. She knew exactly what she felt. She felt alive for the first time in 3 years. She felt seen and understood. She felt desire stirring in her blood, a longing she had thought died with Thomas. She felt terrified and exhilarated and more herself than she had been since she was 19 years old. Then let me tell you what I see, Matthew said. I see a woman who has survived things that would break most people. I see someone who works herself to exhaustion because she is too proud to give up. I see loneliness in your eyes, Eleanor, the same loneliness I feel. We are both searching for something. Maybe we have been searching for each other. You are being fanciful, Eleanor said, but her voice shook. You are a drifter, Matthew. In the spring, you will want to move on, and I will be here with a broken heart and a ranch to run. What if I do not want to move on? What if I want to stay? You say that now, but Eleanor. He reached across the fire and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. I know my own mind. I am 25 years old, not some boy with foolish dreams. I know what I want, and what I want is you. I want to wake up every morning knowing I get to see your face. I want to build something with you, not just a ranch but a life. I want to make you smile the way you used to smile in that picture on the mantel, the one from before your husband died. Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now. That girl in the picture does not exist anymore. Maybe not. But the woman you are now is even better. That girl had not been tested. You have been through fire, Eleanor, and you came through steel. That is who I am in love with. The real you, not some younger version. You love me. The words came out choked. I love you, Matthew said firmly. I have been in love with you since the first week I was here, watching you fight so hard to keep this place going. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was just admiration or gratitude for the work. But it is more than that. It is everything. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the enormity of what he was offering wash over her. It would be so easy to say yes, to reach across the fire and take what he was giving. But fear held her back, fear of being hurt again, fear of losing control, fear of what it would mean to let someone else into the fortress she had built around her heart. I am afraid, she whispered. I know, Matthew said gently. But Eleanor is not being afraid just another word for caring. You cannot be hurt by something that does not matter to you. Fear means you feel something real, and that is worth the risk. She opened her eyes and looked at him. In the firelight, he looked older than his years, his face serious and open and full of a hope that made her chest ache. How had this young cowboy come to understand her so well? How had he seen past all her defenses to the lonely woman beneath? If I do this, she said slowly, if I let myself feel this, you have to promise me something. Promise me you will be honest. If you change your mind, if you want to leave, tell me. Do not stay out of obligation or pity. I could not bear that. I promise, Matthew said immediately. But Eleanor, I will not change my mind. I am not Thomas. I cannot replace him, and I would never try, but I can offer you something new, a partnership, a future, love if you will have it. Eleanor stood up, her legs shaky, and walked around the fire. Matthew stood too, watching her approach. When she was close enough to touch, she reached up and placed her palm against his cheek. His skin was warm, his jaw rough with stubble. He leaned into her touch, his eyes never leaving her face. I am scared, she said again. Me too, he admitted. But I think the best things are always a little scary. And then he kissed her, and Eleanor felt something inside her chest crack open like ice breaking on a spring river. His lips were gentle at first, tentative, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted to fall into this moment, to let herself feel everything she had been holding back. She kissed him back, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, and Matthew made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer. They stood there by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, kissing like they had all the time in the world and not enough time at all. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. I have been wanting to do that for months. Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from deep in her belly. So have I, though I did not want to admit it. They sat by the fire for hours more, talking and kissing and making plans. Matthew told her about his dreams for the ranch, ideas he had been afraid to voice. Eleanor talked about her fears, her guilt over moving on from Thomas, her worry that she was too damaged to love again. Matthew listened to it all, holding her hand, occasionally pressing kisses to her temple or her hair, making her feel cherished in a way she had almost forgotten. "You are not damaged," he told her fiercely. "You are just human. You loved your husband and you grieved him. That is normal and right. But he would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone, Eleanor. I did not know Thomas, but any man who loved you would want you to be happy." She knew he was right. Thomas had been kind and good, and he would have wanted her to find happiness again. It was Eleanor herself who had held on to grief like a shield, using it to protect herself from ever feeling vulnerable again. "You reminded me how to love again," she whispered, and Matthew pulled her close, tucking her against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. They slept that night on opposite sides of the fire, propriety still dictating some boundaries, but Eleanor slept better than she had in years. She woke to find Matthew already up, making coffee, watching her with a soft smile that made her heart flip over. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, and the simple words felt weighted with promise. They drove the cattle down from the mountains that day, working in perfect harmony. When they reached the ranch as the sun was setting, Eleanor felt like she was seeing it with new eyes. This was not just the place of her grief anymore. It could be the place of her future. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Matthew still slept in the bunkhouse, and they were careful to maintain appearances when anyone from town came by. But in private moments, they were open about their feelings. Matthew would steal kisses when they were alone in the barn. Eleanor would find reasons to touch his hand or his shoulder as they worked. At night, they sat together on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, watching the stars come out over the mountains. "When should we tell people?" Eleanor asked one evening in late October. They were sitting close together on the porch steps, Matthew's arm around her shoulders. "Whenever you are ready," Matthew said. "I know this is complicated. I do not want to push you into anything." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I want to wait until spring. I want us to have this winter together, just us, to be sure. And I want to give the town gossips time to get used to seeing you around. If we just suddenly announce we are courting, they will say terrible things. I do not care what they say. I know, but I do. Not for my sake, but for yours. They will call you a fortune hunter, say you are after my land. I want them to see you work, to respect you first." Matthew kissed the top of her head. "Whatever you want, Eleanor, I am not going anywhere." Winter came to the Colorado high country with the first big snow in November. The cattle were safely in the low pastures, the hay was stored, and the ranch settled into the slower rhythm of the cold months. Matthew moved into the house, ostensibly because the bunkhouse was too cold to heat properly, but really because neither of them could stand the separation anymore. They were careful, conscious of propriety even though no one was around to see. Matthew slept in the spare bedroom, and they kept their relationship chaste beyond kissing. Eleanor appreciated his restraint, the way he let her set the pace, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But the intimacy of living together was its own kind of profound. They cooked meals together, washed dishes side by side, sat by the fire in the evenings reading or talking. Eleanor taught Matthew to read better. He had basic literacy but wanted to improve. Matthew taught Eleanor card games he had learned in bunkhouses across the West. They played checkers and argued good-naturedly about politics and debated the best way to raise horses. On Christmas Eve, they sat together by the fire, and Matthew pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. "I know we said we were not exchanging gifts," he said, looking suddenly nervous, "but I wanted you to have this." Eleanor unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a hair comb, simple but beautiful, with delicate flowers carved into the wood. "Matthew, this is lovely." "Where did you—" "I made it. Been working on it in the evenings in the barn when you thought I was just doing chores. I am not much of a woodcarver, but I wanted you to have something from me." Eleanor felt tears well up. The comb was not perfect, the flowers were a bit lopsided, the wood slightly uneven. But it was the most precious thing anyone had ever given her because it represented hours of work, of thought, of caring. "It is perfect," she said and kissed him. "I love it, and I love you." It was the first time she had said the words out loud, and Matthew's face transformed with joy. "Say it again." "I love you, Matthew Porter." "I love you too, Eleanor Nash. I want to marry you. I know we said we would wait until spring, but I am saying it now so you know my intentions are serious. When you are ready, I want you to be my wife." "Yes," Eleanor said, surprising herself. "Yes, I will marry you. Not yet, not until spring like we planned. But yes." They kissed by the firelight, and Eleanor felt like she was being given a second chance at life. The guilt over Thomas had faded, replaced by gratitude for the time they had had and acceptance that it was time to move forward. Matthew was right. Thomas would have wanted her to be happy. And she was happy, gloriously, unexpectedly happy in a way she had never quite been before. January and February passed in a blur of snow and cold and quiet contentment. The ranch slept under its blanket of white, and Matthew and Eleanor grew closer with each passing day. They talked about their future, about the changes they would make to the ranch, about whether they wanted children. "I would like a family," Matthew admitted one night. "Not right away, but someday. I know you and Thomas never had children, and if you do not want to, I will understand. But I think you would be an amazing mother." Eleanor was silent, remembering. She and Thomas had tried for years without success. She had assumed she was barren, and the grief of that had been its own private agony. "I do not know if I can have children," she said quietly. "Thomas and I tried for 10 years. "That does not mean it was you," Matthew said gently. "It could have been him, or just bad timing, or who knows what. And if we cannot have children of our own, maybe we could adopt. There are plenty of orphans in this world who need homes. But Eleanor, I want to be clear. I am not marrying you for children or for the ranch or for anything except you. If it is just us for the rest of our lives, that would be enough." She kissed him for that, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. March arrived with the first hints of spring, and Eleanor knew it was time. On a Sunday morning, they rode into Fort Garland together for church services. The little whitewashed church was full, as it always was, with the faces Eleanor had known for years. She felt them watching as she and Matthew walked in together, noting the way he held the door for her, the way her hand rested on his arm. After the service, as people milled around outside talking, Eleanor took a deep breath and made their announcement. "I would like you all to know that Matthew and I are engaged to be married," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the churchyard. "The wedding will be in May, and you are all invited." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, stepped forward with a smile. "Well, it is about time, Eleanor Nash. We have all been watching you two make eyes at each other for months. Congratulations." The tension broke, and people came forward to offer their wishes. Some were genuine, some were clearly forced, and Eleanor knew there would be gossip. But as she stood with Matthew's hand in hers, she found she did not care. Let them talk. She had found something precious, something worth any amount of gossip or judgment. The wedding took place on a perfect May morning in 1879, with wildflowers blooming across the valley and the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. The ceremony was held at the ranch, under the cottonwood tree where Thomas had proposed to Eleanor a decade earlier. She had worried that might be strange, marrying Matthew in the same spot, but it felt right, like a blessing from the past on her future. Eleanor wore a simple dress of pale blue silk, and Matthew wore new clothes purchased in town, looking handsome and nervous. The preacher from Fort Garland officiated, and most of the town turned out to watch, curiosity apparently stronger than disapproval. When Matthew said his vows, his voice rang out clear and strong. "Eleanor, I promise to love you, to respect you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to work beside you, to build a life with you, to be faithful to you all my days. You have given me a home and a purpose, but more than that, you have given me yourself. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift." Eleanor was crying by the time it was her turn. "Matthew, when you rode up to this ranch last year, I was half dead inside, just going through the motions of living. You brought me back to life. You reminded me how to laugh, how to hope, how to love. I promise to cherish you, to support your dreams, to be your partner in all things. I promise to love you for all the days I have left on this earth and beyond." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew kissed her in front of God and everyone, a kiss that spoke of promise and passion and a future bright with possibility. The crowd cheered, and Eleanor laughed against his mouth, feeling lighter than air. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Tables were set up in the yard laden with food the neighbors had brought. There was music and dancing, and Eleanor danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling like the girl in that photograph on the mantel, the one who had not yet learned about grief and loss. Except now she was better because she had learned about resilience and second chances too. Late that night, when all the guests had finally left and they were alone in the house, Matthew carried Eleanor over the threshold of the bedroom they would now share. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly as he reached up to remove the pins from her hair. "Are you nervous?" Eleanor asked softly. "Terrified," Matthew admitted with a shaky laugh. "I want everything to be perfect for you." Eleanor took his face in her hands. "It already is perfect. You are perfect. We are perfect together, and we have all the time in the world to figure out the rest." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with reverence and care. Matthew was gentle and patient, and Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks at the overwhelming rightness of it. This was what she had been missing with Thomas, this sense of equal partnership, of two people coming together as true partners rather than guardian and ward. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Matthew traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me, for letting me love you, for agreeing to be my wife, for everything." Eleanor kissed him softly. "You gave me my life back, Matthew. I should be thanking you. Then we will just have to spend the rest of our lives thanking each other." The months and years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Matthew's skill with horses became known throughout the region, and they started a side business breeding and training horses that brought in additional income. Eleanor's confidence grew as she had a true partner to share the burden of running the ranch. They faced challenges, of course. There was a drought in 1880 that forced them to sell off part of the herd. A pack of wolves killed several calves in 1881, requiring vigilant patrols and restless nights. Matthew's father died in 1882, and he had to travel back to Missouri for the funeral, leaving Eleanor to manage alone for a month. She realized during that month how much she had come to depend on him, not just for the physical labor but for his companionship, his love, his steadying presence. But through it all, their love deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's moods. They learned when to push and when to give space, when to talk and when to simply be present. They learned to fight constructively, airing grievances before they festered, always remembering that they were on the same side. In the spring of 1883, Eleanor realized her monthly courses had not come. At first, she was afraid to hope, remembering the years of disappointment with Thomas. But when the nausea started and her breasts became tender, she could not deny it any longer. She told Matthew on a Sunday morning in April as they sat on the porch watching the sunrise. "I think I am with child." Matthew went very still. Then he turned to her, his face transforming with wonder and joy. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. We should wait a few more months to be certain, but all the signs are there." Matthew pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Eleanor, I do not even have words." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "I know. I am terrified and thrilled, and I cannot quite believe it. You are going to be such a good mother, and you will be an incredible father." They sat together watching the sun climb over the mountains, and Eleanor thought about how far she had come. 5 years ago, she had been a widow grinding herself down trying to keep a ranch alive, convinced she would spend the rest of her life alone. Now she had a husband who loved her, a thriving ranch, and a child on the way. Life had given her a second chance, and she had been brave enough to take it. The pregnancy was difficult. Eleanor was older than the ideal age for first-time mothers, and the work of the ranch did not stop just because she was carrying a child. Matthew was fiercely protective, trying to take on all the heavy labor himself, but Eleanor refused to be coddled. They compromised, with Eleanor doing lighter tasks and resting more, while Matthew handled the most strenuous work. In December of 1883, during a snowstorm that howled around the house and piled drifts against the windows, Eleanor went into labor. Matthew rode through the blizzard to fetch the midwife from town, nearly getting lost in the whiteout conditions. By the time he returned with Mrs. Chen, the Chinese midwife who served the region, Eleanor was in hard labor. It was a long night. Matthew paced the kitchen while Mrs. Chen worked, and he jumped every time Eleanor cried out. He had assisted with difficult births in cattle and horses, but this was different. This was his wife, his love, and he felt helpless and terrified. Finally, as dawn was breaking and the snow had stopped, Matthew heard the sound he had been waiting for, a baby's cry, strong and indignant. He rushed to the bedroom door, and Mrs. Chen beckoned him inside. Eleanor lay propped against pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "Matthew," she said softly, "come meet your son." Matthew approached on shaky legs and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. His son. He had a son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and Eleanor's nose and his own stubborn chin. "He is perfect," Matthew breathed. "He is," Eleanor agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Matthew knew. Thomas. "For your first husband. He was part of making you who you are, and I want to honor that." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Matthew, you do not have to, I want to. Thomas gave me an incredible gift by loving you first, by building this ranch with you. Our son can carry his name." Thomas Matthew Porter. Eleanor pulled him down to kiss him, their baby cradled between them. "Thomas Matthew it is. Thank you, my love." The early months of parenthood were exhausting and chaotic and more wonderful than either of them could have imagined. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged. Matthew was a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with his son when the baby was fussy. Watching Matthew with their child made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. He was patient and tender, singing nonsense songs in his rumbling voice, making silly faces to coax smiles from the baby. He was not afraid to be gentle, to show emotion, to be fully present as a father in a way many men of their time would have scorned as unmanly. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Eleanor knew she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because her body knew what to expect. In the spring of 1885, She gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Margaret, after both their mothers. Grace was completely different from Thomas. Where he had been calm and easy, she was fussy and demanding. Where he had been content to observe, she wanted to be in the middle of everything. Matthew said she had her mother's determination, and Eleanor could not argue with that. The ranch adjusted to accommodate their growing family. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms. They hired additional help, a young couple looking for work and a place to live, who moved into the bunkhouse and helped with both the ranch work and watching the children. Eleanor found that being a mother did not diminish her as a rancher. Rather, the two roles complemented each other, teaching her new depths of patience and fierce protective love. The children grew, and the ranch prospered. Thomas turned out to have his father's gift with animals, spending hours in the barn watching Matthew work with the horses. Grace was fearless, climbing everything she could reach, always getting into mischief. In 1887, Eleanor gave birth to twin boys, Robert and William, and the house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and laughter. Through it all, Matthew and Eleanor's marriage remained strong. They still stole moments together, conversations on the porch after the children were asleep, rides up to the high meadows on summer afternoons, quiet intimacy in the early morning hours before the household woke. They had built something real and lasting, a partnership that only deepened with time. One evening in the summer of 1890, they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, teaching 6-year-old Grace how to rope a fence post. The twins, 3 years old, were engaged in some complicated game that involved a lot of running and shouting. "Hard to believe it has been 11 years, Matthew said, his hand finding Eleanor's. 11 years since I hired a young cowboy." Eleanor agreed with a smile. "Best decision you ever made. Absolutely the best." She looked at him, this man who had ridden into her life when she needed him most. There was gray threading through his dark hair now, and the sun had etched deeper lines around his eyes, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. More so, even, because now she knew the depth of his character, the steadiness of his love. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, seeing her expression. "That I am grateful," Eleanor said. "I was so lost before you came. I thought I knew what my life was supposed to be, and then Thomas died and everything fell apart. But maybe it had to fall apart so it could come back together differently. Maybe I had to lose everything to find what I really needed." Matthew lifted her hand and kissed it. "You saved me too, you know. I was drifting, sending money home, but never really building anything for myself. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky and the stars begin to appear. Eleanor thought about that day 11 years ago when she had watched a dusty cowboy ride up her road. She had been terrified of letting anyone in, convinced that her life was over at 29. How wrong she had been. "You reminded me how to love again," she said softly, echoing words she had spoken years ago by a campfire in the mountains. "And you taught me that second chances are real, that it is never too late to start over." Matthew pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Eleanor Porter. I love you too, Matthew, always." The years continued to unfold, bringing joys and sorrows as years do. They lost Eleanor's beloved horse to old age. They weathered another drought, another harsh winter, a grasshopper plague that nearly destroyed the hay crop. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, taught their children to read and ride and work the land. They watched Thomas grow into a thoughtful young man with his father's gentle way with animals. They cheered as Grace won ribbons for her riding at the county fair. They laughed at the twins' antics and wondered how two people could look identical but have such different personalities. Through it all, The ranch thrived. Matthew's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from as far as Denver to buy animals from the Porter Ranch. Eleanor's business acumen kept them profitable even in lean years. Together, they built something that would last, a legacy for their children and their children's children. In 1895, on a warm May evening, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from all over the region, the same people who had once gossiped about the widow and her young hired hand. Now those whispers were long forgotten, replaced by respect for what Matthew and Eleanor had built together. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Eleanor and Matthew walked up to the overlook above the house, the spot where they had first admitted their feelings to each other all those years ago. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, and Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace. "You ever regret it?" she asked Matthew. "Staying here, settling down, you could have seen more of the world, had adventures." Matthew laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Eleanor, I have had the greatest adventure of all. I found love with an incredible woman. I helped build a successful ranch. I have raised 4 children who are growing into remarkable people. What adventure could compare to that?" You always know exactly what to say. "That is because I mean it. Every word. You are my adventure, Eleanor. You and this life we built together. I would not change a single thing." They stood together as the sun set over the Colorado peaks, 2 people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life from love and hard work and determination. Eleanor thought about the scared widow she had been, and the woman she had become. She thought about Thomas, her first husband, and sent up a silent thank you for the foundation he had given her. And she thought about Matthew, this gift of a second chance, who had taught her that it was never too late to love again. Below them, the ranch spread out in all its beauty. The house with smoke curling from the chimney, the barn and corrals, the pastures where cattle and horses grazed, the creek glinting silver in the fading light, and beyond, the mountains standing watch, just as Thomas had promised they would all those years ago. This was home. This was family. This was love in all its messy, complicated, glorious reality. And Eleanor would not trade it for anything in the world. Matthew kissed her as the first stars appeared, and Eleanor kissed him back, pouring 17 years of love and gratitude and joy into the gesture. They had been given a second chance, both of them, and they had seized it with both hands. They had built a life together that honored the past while embracing the future. They had created something beautiful and lasting. And as they walked back down to the house hand in hand, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that this was how love stories were supposed to end. Not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with 2 people choosing each other day after day, year after year, with partnership and respect and deep, abiding affection. With a life built together, brick by brick, day by day. Matthew had told her once that the best things were always a little scary. He had been right. Loving again after loss had been terrifying, but it had also been the best decision she had ever made. Because in opening her heart to Matthew, she had not betrayed Thomas's memory. She had honored it by continuing to live, to grow, to love. The house was warm and bright with lamplight when they entered. Thomas the younger was reading to his siblings, and the twins were arguing good-naturedly about something. Grace looked up as her parents entered and smiled, and Eleanor felt her heart overflow with love for this family they had created. "Everything all right?" Grace asked. "Everything is perfect," Eleanor said, and meant it with her whole heart. That night, lying in bed with Matthew's arms around her, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first day when a dusty young cowboy had ridden up to her ranch, to this moment of absolute contentment, it had not always been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles, moments of doubt and fear, but through it all they had held fast to each other. "Matthew," she whispered into the darkness. "MMM." His voice was sleepy. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing past my defenses to the woman underneath. For loving me when I had forgotten how to love myself." Matthew tightened his arms around her. "Eleanor, loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. You made it easy by being yourself, brave and strong and beautiful and real." She turned in his arms to face him, barely able to make out his features in the darkness. But she did not need to see him. She knew every line of his face, every expression, every nuance of his voice. She knew him better than she had ever known anyone. "I love you," she said simply. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone. You changed my life, Matthew Porter." "We changed each other's lives," he corrected gently. "That is what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Eleanor's last conscious thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for this second chance, for this good man who had ridden into her life when she needed him most, for the family they had created together, for the love that had grown and deepened over the years. The years continued their steady march forward. The children grew and started families of their own. Thomas married a schoolteacher from Fort Garland and took over running the cattle side of the ranch. Grace married a horse trainer from Wyoming, and together they expanded the horse breeding program until it was known throughout the region. The twins eventually left to seek their fortunes, Robert becoming a lawyer in Denver and William joining the railroad. Matthew and Eleanor grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining, their bodies slowing. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming richer and more comfortable, like a favorite chair or a well-worn saddle. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents. They watched the ranch pass to the next generation, Thomas the younger proving to be as capable a rancher as his parents had been. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains, reminiscing about their life together. On a summer evening in 1920, 41 years after their wedding, Eleanor and Matthew celebrated their anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch had grown and prospered beyond their wildest dreams, now encompassing thousands of acres and supporting multiple families. As the party wound down and the younger generation headed home, Matthew and Eleanor found themselves alone on the porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the decades. 41 years, Eleanor marveled. She was 70 now, her hair completely white, her body frail. But her mind was still sharp, and her love for Matthew burned as bright as ever. Who would have thought that dusty young cowboy would turn out to be the love of my life? Matthew, at 66, was still relatively spry, though his joints ached in cold weather and he moved more carefully than he once had. He squeezed Eleanor's hand gently. "I knew the moment I saw you standing on that porch. I knew you were going to change my life." "Liar," Eleanor said affectionately. "You thought I was a grumpy widow who was going to work you too hard." "Well, yes, that too," Matthew admitted with a laugh. "But I was right about the life-changing part." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, the wind in the cottonwoods, an owl calling from the barn. These were the sounds that had surrounded them for more than 4 decades, the soundtrack of their life together. "You remember that night in the mountains?" Eleanor asked. "When you told me you loved me for the first time." "I remember everything," Matthew said. "Every moment, every conversation, every kiss. You are written into my very bones, Eleanor. You are part of who I am." "And you are part of me," Eleanor replied. "The best part, you saved me, Matthew." When I was drowning in grief and loneliness, you threw me a lifeline. You showed me that life could still be beautiful. You saved yourself, Matthew corrected. You were brave enough to take the risk to open your heart again. I just happened to be there at the right time. No, Eleanor said firmly. You were exactly the right person at exactly the right time. It was fate or providence or whatever you want to call it. You were meant to ride up that road. We were meant to find each other. They talked late into the night, as they always had, sharing memories and stories. They laughed about the early days when Matthew had been so nervous around her. They reminisced about their children's antics and accomplishments. They marveled at how the ranch had grown and changed. They counted themselves blessed for the life they had built together. As the night grew late and the air chilled, they went inside to the bedroom they had shared for 41 years. Matthew helped Eleanor into bed with the tender care of someone who had been performing this service for years. He climbed in beside her and pulled her close, and they lay together in the darkness. "Eleanor," Matthew whispered. "Yes, my love. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a rootless cowboy with nothing but big dreams and a good heart. Thank you for building this life with me. You have made me happier than I ever imagined possible." Eleanor felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I am the one who should be grateful. You gave me everything, Matthew. Love, family, purpose, joy. You turned my grief into hope. You showed me that endings could become new beginnings. I love you with everything I am, and I always will." "I love you too, Eleanor Porter, in this life and whatever comes after." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had every night for 41 years. Two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. A young cowboy and a rancher's widow who had reminded each other that it was never too late to love, to hope, to begin again. And in the morning, they would wake to another day together, another chance to love each other, another opportunity to count their blessings. Because that was what love was, really. Not the grand gestures or the passionate declarations, though those had their place. Love was showing up, day after day, year after year, choosing each other over and over again. It was working side by side on a ranch in Colorado. It was raising children together through joy and heartbreak. It was holding each other through loss and celebrating together in triumph. It was growing old together, your bodies failing but your hearts still strong. Eleanor and Matthew had learned these lessons the hard way, through experience and time. And they had created something beautiful, something that would outlast them both. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the legacy of their love, proof that second chances were real, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that it was never too late to begin again. As the stars wheeled overhead and the mountains stood their eternal watch, Eleanor Nash Porter and Matthew Porter slept peacefully in each other's arms, two souls who had found their way home to each other, who had built a life of love and meaning from the ashes of loss and loneliness. Their story was one of courage and faith and the transformative power of love. It was a story that would be told around firesides for generations to come, inspiring others to take risks, to open their hearts, to believe in second chances. Because in the end, that was the greatest gift they gave to each other and to the world. They proved that love could triumph over fear, that hope could rise from despair, that two broken pieces could come together and make something whole. They reminded everyone who knew them that life was precious and fragile and worth fighting for, that every ending carried the seed of a new beginning, that it was never, ever too late to love again. And that was how their story ended, not with drama or tragedy, but with peace and contentment and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had built something lasting and beautiful together, who had loved each other through all the days of their lives and beyond. The ranch still stands today, run by their descendants, a testament to the power of love and hard work and unwavering commitment. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the wind blows just right, you can almost hear the echo of their voices on the porch, talking and laughing, living their love story one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time.